You are now tuning into the Resilient Podcast. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 22 of the Resilient Podcast. I am your host, Rob Aurelius. And before we get started with today's episode, which is titled The Weight of Moving On, Finding Closure Without Answers, I want to talk about the previous episode 21 with my friend Megaran. Inevitable. Megaran is such a good person and he is such a great friend. And I was so fortunate to finally have him on my podcast. You know, when I first spoke to Megaran about the podcast and I told him that I wanted him to be a guest, he told me, I want to be guest number 5, even though he said number 9 because he forgot that he had said number 5 originally. I literally waited until the beginning of this year to actually have him on the podcast. Jose was the last guest that I had on the podcast until I finally had Megaran on the podcast. So I want to talk to you all about how this month is Black History Month. And Black History Month is very important to me because I have a lot of people in my life that are Black, African American, Caribbean, but pretty much my friends, like a lot of them are Black. And I am all about Black History Month. I love like the revolutionary people from Black History Month, like Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, believe it or not, Jamie Foxx, Denzel Washington. Those are some of the most recent people, but some of the older folks that revolutionized and made things what they are today: Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, the legendary Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the list goes on and on and on. And let's not forget the first president of the United States who happened to be Black, right? A man of color, Barack Obama, who was one of the greatest presidents of our time, in my opinion. And our recent vice president, Kamala Harris, who I actually wrote a letter to. And I talked about it on social media, but I never really got the chance to talk too much about it. But yes, I wrote a letter to Kamala Harris on the Resilience Tribune. So if you look at the link below, resilienctribune.com, and you go to our publications section, you'll see the letter that I wrote to her. It was a beautiful, beautiful letter. And I'm actually thinking of reading it. And I will actually kick off this episode with the letter that I wrote to Kamala Harris. So I wanted to share that with everyone real quick. So give me a moment. And while I'm looking for that, this episode is going to be very interesting because I have a few things to talk about. And I'm still, on a high from the episode with Megaran because I think it was one of the greatest episodes so far of the Resilient Podcast. And I hope everyone had enjoyed this episode. So I'm on the website right now, resiliencetribune.com. This is our website. This is what it looks like mobile for those that are watching on YouTube. When you go to publications, okay? And in publications, look at that. Look at that beautiful photo right there. That was actually designed by, ARCG associate Oscar. So I wrote a letter to Kamala Harris. And I wrote this to her actually on January 20th, which was the day of the inauguration for the new president, but it was also Martin Luther King Day. And folks, this was the first publication for the Resilience Tribune website. So I knew that I wanted to take some time eventually to read this out loud to everyone. And I hope that everyone appreciates this. So it's called The Letter to Kamala Harris. And I wrote, Dear Madame Vice President, today, January 20th, 2025, as our nation observes Martin Luther King Jr. Day and transitions into a new era, my heart is filled with profound gratitude and reflection. Not on the incoming administration, but on the remarkable legacy you have forged as Vice President of the United States. Your tenure has been a testament to the realization of Dr. King's dream. As the first woman, the first Black American, and the first South Asian American to hold the office of Vice President, you have embodied the very essence of resilience, breaking barriers and paving the way for future generations. Your journey reflects the progress envisioned by Dr. King, demonstrating that through perseverance and unwavering commitment, the arc of history indeed bends towards justice. Your 4 years in office have been marked by historic achievements and empathetic leadership that have profoundly impacted our nation. Even as challenges arose, you met them with grace and an unshakable commitment to justice. I also want to express my heartfelt thanks for your decision to select Tim Walz as your running mate in your most recent campaign. Your choice demonstrated your ability to recognize the value of teamwork and resilience in leadership. Together, you embodied a vision of unity, pragmatism, and hope that this country desperately needed. While the election did not yield the outcome we hoped for you, your partnership with Tim Walz showcased the power of resilience, determination, and belief in a better future. Madam Vice President, your achievements during your tenure are nothing short of extraordinary. Number one, economic resilience and equity. Your leadership in expanding the child tax credit, providing crucial support to struggling families, lifting millions of children out of poverty, and helping households recover with dignity. Number two, resilient democracy. Your tireless advocacy for voting rights highlighted your commitment to protecting the very foundation of our democracy. You demonstrated resilience in the face of opposition, reminding us all of the importance of free and fair elections. Number three, resilience in the face of climate change. Your environmental initiatives, from championing clean energy to advocating for climate justice, have left a lasting impact. You remind us of the importance of building a sustainable future through resilience and innovation. Number four, global resilience through diplomacy. On the world stage, you represented the United States with strength and dignity, fostering resilience in international relations. Your work in addressing migration challenges and strengthening partnerships demonstrated your ability to lead with compassion and strategy. And finally, number 5, resilient leadership for women and families. You have been a steadfast advocate for women's rights, family support systems, and gender equity. Your efforts to improve access to childcare, paid family leave, and workplace equality have inspired countless people. Your resilience has been a guiding light for this country. It hasn't always been easy. And I know that not every outcome you met your or our expectations. But what matters most is that you never gave up. You persevered with dignity and showed us the importance of fighting for what's right, even in the face of adversity. Personally, your leadership has taught me so much. It is because of your resilience that I recreated the Resilience Tribune, a platform dedicated to sharing stories of strength, perseverance, and hope. You are the very embodiment of resilience. And through your example, I have learned to see challenges not as obstacles, but as opportunities to grow, adapt, and overcome. Even as you step away from the vice presidency, I refuse to say goodbye. This is not the end of your journey. It is merely the beginning of a new chapter. You may no longer hold the title of vice president, but you will forever hold the title of one of the most resilient leaders in our nation's history. Your resilience has not just been a source of inspiration, but a call to action. It has reminded me that progress is not linear, and that resilience is the foundation upon which all meaningful change is built. Even in the moments when it felt like the world was against you, you stood tall, held firm, and carried with an unshakable sense of purpose. Madam Vice President, you have shown us what true resilience looks like. You have demonstrated that leadership is about service, not self-interest, compassion, not cruelty, unity, and not division. Your tenure may be over, but your legacy will live on in the hearts and minds of the millions of people you have inspired. I also want to acknowledge the deeply human element of your leadership. You have faced criticism. You have made mistakes, just as all of us do. But what sets you apart is willingness to learn, adapt, and keep moving forward. That is resilience. That is leadership. And that is why I admire you so deeply. Today, as the nation turns its eyes towards the future, my focus is on honoring you and the incredible example you have set. You have earned the title of Madam Vice President, and you will always be a president of my heart, a leader who has shown us that resilience is not just a trait, but a way of life. I hope and believe that one day the country will be ready for you to lead as president. Until that day comes, know that you have already achieved something far greater. You have inspired a generation to believe in the power of resilience and to fight for a better and more inclusive world. Thank you, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, for everything. Thank you for your service, your strength, and your resilience. Thank you for showing us that progress is possible and that hope is always worth holding on to. With deepest gratitude, admiration, and respect, your fellow American, Rob Aurelius. So that's what I wrote to her on January 20th of this year. You know, I don't want to make this podcast about politics, but we do have to understand, like Mega Ran mentioned in the previous episode, we're going through some times right now. And I am still a human being at the end of the day. I still live in this country called America. And I believe, and I know that my input is valuable, that the way I feel about something is valuable. All of us, all of us. And I like the fact that I can share that with everyone. And, when I first created the Resilience Tribune, someone had asked me, you know, hey, Rob, what are you going to do with this platform? It was originally supposed to be for Brooklyn, and now it's going to be about resilience. So what are you going to do? And I said, look, it's going to be for people to showcase stories about resilience, perseverance, hope, everything. And then they said, well, how are you going to kick it off? And I said, I'm going to kick it off with a story of resilience of my own, my story. But then when, I noticed that Kamala had lost the election, that same month of November was the same month that I was supposed to get engaged if I was still with my ex-girlfriend. It was also her birthday, and I actually launched the Resilience Tribune on my ex-girlfriend's birthday, November 19th. I said, you know what? I think I know who I want to write this first publication about. And by Christmas time, when, the year was about to end, I said to myself, I need to make sure that this is what I want to do. Because, there might be some backlash. There might be some folks that might not be happy with it. And I said, you know what? My platform, I choose how I want to use it. And I chose to use it in a very positive way. So around the end of the year, I came up with some ideas of what I wanted to write to her. And then before January 20th, the last week of her vice presidency and Joe Biden's presidency, I finally finished this letter and I had it ready. And I shared it with friends. I shared it with associates, the drafts and whatnot. And they said, do you like this? And they said, of course. This is beautiful. You talked so much about resilience there. And I was like, that's what it's all about. It's all about resilience. And they said, yeah, but it's perfect. And when someone said to me that it was perfect, I said, thank you. I really appreciate it. So I hit the publish button on January 20th. And I've gotten so much positive feedback. I love it. So, now let's talk about how, I already recapped with everyone the episode with Meg Ran about availability. And, I want to talk about the topic of this episode, finding closure without answers. And I want to acknowledge that it has now been 11 months since the breakup. Almost a year now, folks. Almost a year, because we're in February. And how resilience continues to be a central theme in this journey of mine. A few days ago, I had came back from a trip in Washington, D.C. I was in my feelings. Man, was I in my feelings. And I'll explain to you why. I was in my feelings on Valentine's Day because this year I wasn't able to take anyone out for Valentine's Day. Last year, even though my ex and I were together, I wasn't able to take her out on Valentine's Day because Valentine's Day is her dog's birthday. And the last time I saw her was February 13th last year. And then we broke up in March. And, when February 13th came by, I said, man, this is just one more date to come. And that date is going to be March 21st. And it's just so crazy because, I tell people that numbers mean something. And there's people that are like, oh, it's just an illusion. It's just, people, when people set their minds up for certain things, that's just how they feel. And I'm like, no, seriously, like, really, like, look, like, numbers mean something. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you all is because February 13th was technically 213, right? 213 was the last time I saw her in person. And then a month later, 321, March 21st, was the day we broke up. And those numbers are always going to mean something to me. 213, 321. And, you know, like I said, I was talking to this friend of mine, this new friend of mine who I met last year, and we were just chopping it up, and we were talking about resilience, and we were talking about the myth of closure. And my friend's like, you think you're ever going to get closure? And I remember when they said to me, you know, why do you think that, you know, so many people think closure is necessary to move on? And I said, well, people often believe closure provides a sense of like finality. You know, they believe that helping them make sense of things, of what happened and why. But in reality, closure is a luxury we don't always get, and waiting for it can delay the healing process. And my friend was like, oh, that's true. And I said, yeah. So my friend's like, well, what's the biggest misconcept about closure? And I was like, the biggest misconception of closure. And I was like, I believe that the biggest misconception is that it has to come from the other person or situation. And I said, the truth is, closure comes from within. That's how I feel. I feel that closure comes from within. And it's a decision to accept the past, even when you don't have all the answers. And my friend was like, very, very interesting. And I was like, yeah, that's just how I feel. I mean, folks, everything comes from within. Everything comes from within. And it takes time for us to realize that. But when we finally get it, trust me, everything comes from within, including closure, for those that believe in closure. So then my friend is talking to me about like letting go of the what ifs, right? And they said, how do unanswered questions impact healing? And I was like, in my situation, unanswered questions keep us stuck in the past. Like I was stuck in the past for so long and still can be stuck in the past sometimes, you know, where it's like replaying scenarios and wishing we could have changed the outcome. I wished I could have changed the outcome 1,000 times every time I thought about it. And, you know, it's exhausting and unproductive. But letting go of those what ifs allow us to focus on what's next. And my friend was like, oh, great. I love that. And I was like, yeah, it's true. So it was like, okay, so answer me this. How can someone stop obsessing over what ifs? And I was like, when I answered, I answered to the best of my ability. And I remember saying something along the lines of, it starts by acknowledging that you may never get the answers you want. I never got the answers I wanted. So I was like, instead, you know, just shift your focus to the lessons you've learned and the opportunities ahead rather than dwelling on things you can't control, because it's just the truth. You can't control that. So my friend was like, and this is really interesting. And I was like, you know, do you feel healed? And I was like, I don't feel healed. I feel like I'm healing. So they were like, are you creating your own peace? And I was like, I have to. I have no choice. I have to create my own peace. No one's going to create my peace for me. So they said, okay, so if closure doesn't come from others, how do you create it yourself? And that question got me. And I was like, man, this is like a movie scene where someone says something and you have to like respond back to them. So I said, well, I personally believe that you create closure by focusing on what's in your power. I had a conversation about this with my therapist, and I also had a conversation about this with my friend Estefania, and I also had a conversation about this with my friend Jennifer. And Jennifer shared that with me. You know, she said to me that, you know, you have to focus what's in your power. And these are three very pivotal women in my life. You know, one of them is my best friend. One of them is someone I met last year who has been so instrumental in my healing process. And my therapist, who's been there since day one. My therapist was there from the beginning of this relationship to the end, and she's still there because she's my therapist. And, you know, like I said, like, you know, focusing on what's in your power, your thoughts, your actions, and your mindset. It's about redefining your narrative and giving yourself permission to move forward, because you have to give yourself permission to move forward. It's a challenge. So my friend says to me, hey, what's one practical way to create your own peace? And I was like, I'm glad you asked me that question, because practicing gratitude for the lessons learned and the growth you've experienced, that's a start. Also, I believe that, you know, you write down the things you've gained from the experience, even if it didn't end the way you hoped. You know, you journal it and you read it to yourself. So my friend goes to me, lessons from this heartbreak, like, what have the past 11 months taught you about resilience? And I was like, you know, no one's asked me that question yet, not even my therapist. So I said, well, these last 11 months have taught me that resilience isn't about bouncing back quickly. Definitely not. Because when this initially happened, everyone was just telling me, move on, move on, move on. Like when it was 2 months in, move on. When it was 3 months in, when it was 6 months in, move on. It hasn't even been a year yet since we broke up, and people are telling me to move on. But, you know, it's also about being patient with yourself. You have to embrace the pain and choosing to move forward one step at a time. My friend Stephanie has said that to me, Rob, one step at a time, one day at a time. Take all the time that you need, all the time that you need. And my therapist said the same thing to me too. And when they said that to me, I literally said, this is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough because I don't want to go through this. I don't want to go through this pain. I don't want to go through all this anguish. How can I help myself when so many things happen? You know, during this healing stage, so many things have happened. So many things, like things that remind me of her. You know, music that pops up. One of her favorite songs kept playing. Like I kept going to Bloomingdale's to do events with Dolce and Gabbana. And every time I went to Bloomingdale for a specific period of time, I kept hearing this song that she loves from her favorite bands. And, well, one of her favorite bands. And, you know, this Jung Cook song, Standing Next to You, just kept playing over and over and over and over. And I'm like, this is one of her favorite songs. I used to listen to this song so much in her car. Until the next time I heard it was when we were not together anymore. It became one of my favorite songs. It really did. And I always said to myself, if I was ever a performer, if I was ever a singer, because it was my dream to be a performer and singer, definitely not a podcaster. I would have performed that for her. Whether it was at our wedding, our honeymoon, our engagement party, if we had one, or just somewhere special. It could have been her birthday or our anniversary. And folks, it's still a bitter pill to swallow. It's still hard to process the fact that it's about to be a year. Last week, I remember where I was when I realized what day it was, and I was like, oh, man, today is the 13th. Today makes a year since I took a trip to Philly with a luggage, with a suitcase, to drop her off so many Valentine's Day gifts. A Funko Pop that I made of her, that I customized, books that she had gotten, they were damaged from her move because there was like a flooding at her old place. And when she moved into her new place, she opened up that box with books. And I remember her saying to me, like, oh, these are the books that are damaged. These are the books that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to save. I remember asking her, which books are these again? And she gave me the names of some of the books, and I wrote down like 4 of them. And I got her 2 because I was going to get her 2 more. And I remember that after I got her the books, I had sent her a book stand. And I remember saying to me, like, oh, you sent me something on Amazon. And when she opened that up, she's like, oh, it's a book stand. I was like, yeah, so you can put your books there. And she had said that she had ordered something like from a furniture place that was supposed to be a book stand, and that she was probably going to use that one for her bedroom, but she was going to use the one that she ordered like in the living room. And, just so many gifts that I got her. And the look on her face, even though she seemed so emotionally checked out, she seemed so different at the time. I'll never forget the look that she had on her face when she saw the books, and the smile and the thank you that she gave me, the hug and the kiss. One of the last kisses that she gave me. That day was the last time we kissed, the last time we hugged, the last time I told her in person that I loved her. And she was getting ready to walk her dog while I was heading to the train station to the Amtrak back to New York. I'm just never going to forget that. It's always going to be one of those fond memories. Yeah, man. February 13th, I was in my feelings. And I was thinking, like, should I do this podcast on Valentine's Day? And I said, no, I'm not going to do this podcast on Valentine's Day. I don't have the energy. Like, I was in DC. I was on my way to DC. I was on the road with Diego. And we were driving up there, and I was so silent and I was so quiet. And Diego's like, Robbie, you all right? Is everything all right? And I was just in that car, like, it's been a year since I last saw her. And boy, was she so beautiful the last time I saw her. So beautiful. She had dropped some pounds, because she was working out excessively. She was training for this new job that she wanted. That I don't know if she ever got it. I assume she did. And, just the other day, I was in Atlanta and I was coming back home. And I heard about that accident that happened in Washington, D.C., where that helicopter hit the plane. And my heart goes out to everyone that's affected by this. And all I could do is just thank God and say, God, thank you for allowing me to get home safe. even though Atlanta's a very short trip, but still, like this plane that crashed, they were just minutes away from landing. And then a few days after that, that plane crashes in Philly near where she lives, her and her mother in the northeast side of Philadelphia. And I told my mom, that's where she lives. She lives near that area. My mom goes, how are you certain? I said, Mom, because when before we broke up, that's where she moved. And I went to her mom's house a few times. And the last time that she dropped me off at a bus station to go back to New York was over there by Cotman Avenue, where the plane landed and crashed. And oh man, I I wanted to reach out to her so bad. I wanted to say, "Hey, don't need a response, but I just hope you're safe and that your mom is safe and that nothing happened to either of you." And the fact that I felt like I couldn't reach out, and you know, someone asked me, my therapist also asked me, and my friend that I was talking about, because I told them about this, they said, "What stopped you? Did she block you anywhere?" And I was like, "No, not that I know of." I was like, I texted her on her birthday last year and she didn't respond, but also it said delivered. So they were like, okay, so what stopped you? Why couldn't you reach out? I was like, I was so close to reaching out to her and saying, like, hey, I just hope you're doing fine. And I hope you weren't like personally affected by this. And I was so close to even reaching out to her mother. Like I wanted to reach out to her mom on Facebook and send her a message and just be like, hey, you know, sorry to bother you, but I just hope that you and your daughter are safe and that you weren't affected by this. And I just couldn't do it. There was some type of fear. But what I did was I ended up writing about it on social media. I talked about it. And my friend says to me, well, Rob, you know, you're really emotional about all this stuff, but do you think that you didn't reach out to her maybe because of self-worth? Like, you know, you thought about your self-worth and like, you know, is it worth it to reach out to her? And I was like, no, self-worth didn't have anything to do with this. But they were like, okay, well, so how has this heartbreak shaped your view of self-worth? And I said, look, even though this has nothing to do with what happened in Philadelphia, this heartbreak has reminded me that my worth isn't tied to someone else's validation or presence in my life. I've learned to appreciate myself for who I am, not for who someone else wants me to be. And they said, okay, so when it comes to the future, how do you stay hopeful when you still feel the weight of the past? And I said, hope comes from knowing that every step forward, no matter how small, brings me closer to peace. I remind myself that the best chapters of my life are still ahead of me. They are, they truly are. And my friend goes to me, you know, I know someone that's going through it just like you. They're not handling it as good as you are. So, what advice would you give someone struggling to move on? And I was like, you know, there's so many people moving on from so many things, right? So many things, not just moving on from a loss, you know, moving on from losing a job, you know, losing a partner, losing a house, you know. And I said, look, in my case, moving on from this lost relationship, this lost love, as much as I believe in closure, don't wait for closure to come for someone else. Instead, focus on what you can control, which is your healing, your growth, and your future. Give yourself the closure you need. Give yourself the closure that you need to move forward. And that's all I can say about that. Remember that closure doesn't have to come from others, and that you have to let go of the what ifs and focus on creating your own peace. This journey has taught me so much about resilience and hope. You know, one day I read something that someone wrote about me on social media about my journey, and they said like that's not resilience. And I'm like, it may not be resilience to you, but everything I've endured in my life, all the times that I have been knocked down, knocked on my butt, every time that I've been burnt, not giving up, moving forward, trying to be stronger, learning, that's a definition of resilience. And I don't care how anybody else feels. But like I said to everyone in the beginning of the Resilience podcast, like when I first started it last year, this is my healing journey. I call the shots, I make the rules here. Your opinion is fine, but that's all it is. It's just your opinion. I'm the author of my story. I'm holding the pen, no one else. And my message to the world before I end this episode soon is no one is coming to save you. And that's just the truth. You need to save yourself. And you need to do what needs to be done to find your happiness. Remember when I spoke earlier about everything being within? Everything is within, folks. Just look deep inside. Stand in front of a mirror. Reflect if you have to, because that's what I do, reflect, and you will find the answers eventually with the guidance of God. I have one more date coming up this year that's going to make me reflect, and it's going to be March 21st. When I sit in my office and think about that 2-hour and 22-minute conversation that I had with her before we broke up. And it was the last time I heard her on the phone. So the last time I saw her was 2:13. And the last time I heard her voice on the phone was 3:21. I know that this is a pretty deep and emotional episode, but I promise you that the next episode is going to be very interesting and very fun. I just decided that I want to have another guest. And I know exactly who it's going to be because I've already thought about reaching out to them, and I will make it happen because it's all about manifesting here. So the next episode, episode 23, will be someone else. And then here's the beautiful part. As a bonus, That episode is next week. So before the month ends, February 28th, that episode will be available for everyone to listen to on Spotify, Amazon Music, Amazon Podcast, whatever they call it, Apple Podcast, YouTube. For those that watch this episode, this podcast, I appreciate you all from the bottom of my heart. And folks, before I go, always wanted to remind you that if you are in need of anything that is natural remedies, please don't forget to visit nalahealth.com. And when you purchase anything on that website, make sure that you use the code TRP10 for 10% off of your purchase. And this is not just for one-time use. This is for every purchase that you make. For as long as you purchase off that website, you're always going to get 10% off. Thanks to me. Thanks to the Resilient Podcast. Also, if you want to submit your story about resilience to the Resilience Tribune, ResilienceTribune.com, right there. Send us an email, info@ResilienceTribune.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media. The Resilient Podcast, as you can see right here, follow TRP on Twitter and Instagram at TheResilientPod. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook for the Resilience Tribune at TRP Tribune. It's been a very interesting February. It's been a little cold. It's been a month of reminiscing. It's been a month of reflecting. It's been a month of resilience, but, you know, I'm proud of where I am. And I always have a good time making these episodes. Folks, this is episode 22. 23 is coming up. The 25th episode is going to be in March. I'm excited. But like I said, the next episode will be very interesting. I will have a very special guest. We're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about. But I look forward to it. And you know, next month, March 7th, I return to Philadelphia for the first time this year. And I'm going for a WWE show. And the last time I passed by Philly, I was in tears. That was when I was coming from the train from Atlanta, the Amtrak that I took. That was the last time I went to Philly, and that was in October. I haven't been to Philly since then. But let's see how I feel the next time I go to Philadelphia. But folks, I hope that this episode helped you, or at least served as a guide for anyone that, you know, believes in closure, you know, the weight of moving on, you know, finding closure without answers. Sometimes we have the answers, and it just takes time. Don't expect to have the answers, all the answers, especially right away. Sometimes we don't have all the answers right away, or have all the answers to begin with, but eventually we have the answers at some point. But give yourself grace. That's what I've been doing. I can be the most, I've recognized that I can be very impatient. I've recognized that I can be very stubborn. But I've been giving myself grace this entire journey. Like my friend Estefania said to me, one step at a time, one day at a time. That makes you inevitable, like Megaran said in episode 21. One day at a time. Well, folks, this is it. This is all I got for episode 22. I appreciate you tuning in. I look forward to episode 23 next week. And for now, this is Rob Aurelius saying thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate you all. Always remember to stay resilient. And I love you all. Till next time, peace.